So I'd like to welcome you to our discussion today about the role of AI in the Office of the Future. I'm delighted to be able to welcome to our panel Havard Haukeland and Maria Dantz from Spacemaker AI in Norway, and Wanyu from Xkool in Shenzhen, China. Also with us is Daniel Bolojan, who is part of the DigitalFUTURES team and who is currently in Florida, and I'm in Los Angeles. So we are spanning the globe, and I think this is one of the kind of manifestations of the potential of the digital that we are trying to explore in the whole DigitalFUTURES world setup. So what I'm going to do today, just to set things out in advance, I'm going to say a few words of introduction about our panelists today. And then I'm going to invite Havard and Wanyu to make brief presentations about the work they do in their office, so that in the audience you get a chance to see exactly what we're referring to. I'm very familiar with this, but most of you will not be. This, of course, is a very new thing, AI, and we're talking about a very new development that many people around the world will be unaware of. But is something that I want to try and tease out today and explain and show to the audience that I think is going to have a radical impact on the future of AI. So let me start with Havard. I always have difficulty pronouncing Havard's name because I taught at Harvard. It's not Harvard. There's no R. It's actually the Norwegian version of Howard.
Yes, that's right. So you can just use Howard. That's probably the easiest.
Howard has a background in architecture where he's worked for a number of different practices. And in 2016, became the CEO and co-founder of Spacemaker AI in Norway. Spacemaker AI is a radically new practice. It was launched in 2016 by Havard and Carl Christensen. And it's had an immediate impact on the world of construction and development in Scandinavia. It was, by the end of 2017, it was named as one of the 500 most interesting startups, and in 2018 as the hottest place to work in Norway. It has attracted some $25 million of funding, and it has over 100 employees all around the world, including, and has offices not only in Oslo, but also in Barcelona, Stockholm, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, which, as you know, is where Harvard and MIT are, and I'm sure draws upon the collective talent and some of the graduates from those universities. In fact, one of those working for Spacemaker AI is going to be on our panels in another session on AI, Stanislav Chailu, who a very talented graduate from Harvard GSD. With us also from Spacemaker AI is Maria Dantz, who is an architect by training, who trained in the Bauhaus University Weimar. I'm very conscious of the Bauhaus University Weimar because I used to teach in Dessau, where the other Bauhaus is. And Maria Dantz is now the communications officer for Spacemaker AI. With us also is Wanyu He. Wanyu is the CEO of Xkool, which she founded along with Shadi Yang back in 2016. So in a way, what's so interesting about our panelists today is that Xkool and Spacemaker were founded in the same year. So it's also founded in 2016. The name Xkool has a special significance. Has two special significances. Firstly, it's a contraction of Ex Koolhaas. When you worked for Rem Koolhaas, having graduated from the Berlage, and worked for OMA both in Rotterdam and in Hong Kong. And if you check up in the Urban Dictionary, you probably know this already. Xkool it means hyper cool, the coolest you can get. So anyway, so Xkool was started in 2016. It has a kind of similar funding, to be honest, roughly 100 million RMB, which is, I guess, $15 million. and has also roughly 100 members, and also has a number of branch offices. The central office is in Shenzhen in China. This is often known as the Silicon Valley of China. And in fact, Xkool is part of the Wanyu community in Shenzhen. Wanyu is the leading, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the leading developer in China. Is that correct, Wanyu? Yes, okay.
Yeah, they are one of the biggest.
Yeah, he's an extraordinary individual. I hear that he's climbed most of the mountains in the world. He's maybe in his 60s or something, but super energetic and so on. Okay, so and they have offices elsewhere in China. They have offices in Beijing, Shanghai, and Chongqing. So this is what I think is so fascinating. We have very similar sized practices. The two, to my mind, the two leading practices in the world trying to develop AI for the architectural office. Of course, there are other practices. There are many of them, but to my mind, from my research, you guys are the leaders. Perhaps I could just say something briefly about myself. My name is Neil Leach. I teach in Tongji University, FIU, the European Graduate School, and have taught other places, including Harvard's namesake. But currently I'm working on AI. And I've just completed the manuscript of a book where I'm looking at all aspects of AI, of the introduction of AI into architecture, including one chapter where I refer to both of your work, a chapter about the Office of the Future. The final member of our panel today is Daniel Bolojan. Daniel Bolojan has a foot in both camps. He's both an academic and also has been working in practice. Daniel is a graduate he's originally from Romania. Many years ago, I gave a lecture in Ion Mincu in Bucharest, the leading school in Romania. Daniel was there, and I must have said something to trigger something off, because that was the start of something. And Daniel then moved to Angevanta, graduated from Angevanta, and is now actually still doing a PhD under Patrick Schumacher at Angevanta. He's also working for Corp Himmelblau, and we will see on, I think it's the 2nd of July, we'll see a Wolf Pricks showing in a discussion with Tom Main, showing the work that Daniel's been doing, especially Deep Himmelblau. So, and in addition to that, Daniel is also doing some work under Patrick that's feeding into the work of Zaha Hadid architects in a different way, looking at behavioral patterns in the office. And finally, Daniel is also an academic, a professor, assistant professor, recently appointed at Florida Atlantic University in Fort Lauderdale. We had him for a while as one of our colleagues at FIU, and it was wonderful to have him there, and we're still in contact. That's our panel today. We're also supported by Chao Yan back in China. So I want to start off just by asking, maybe I could ask Havard first to do a presentation that shows the audience, especially those who have little idea about what role AI might play in the office of the future, what you guys do at Spacemaker AI, and then I'll call upon Wanyu afterwards to give us a version of what Xkool does. So Havard, over to you.
Okay, thank you. That's a very nice intro you had there. Thank you so much. I thought to actually just start by showing the software. Or actually, no, let me do it otherwise. I'll start by telling you why we founded Spacemaker and just give you kind of the short founding story, and then I'll show you the software. As you said, my background is from the industry. I used to work as an architect, as you said, and you mentioned my co-founder Carl, who is the CTO, but we were actually 3 founders. So the third one is Anders, who was then who is our chairman. But you're right. I used to work with the manual ways of approaching architecture, and used to work with urban development sites and especially the early stage. I guess Spacemaker was born from a frustration out of that those years that I worked in the industry, And the frustration was mainly centered around that I really felt that we couldn't deliver what our clients wanted and what they needed and what the projects needed. So it was this feeling that we were really trying to reorganize and rethink how we did it, but we couldn't. In the office I used to work with, we couldn't find kind of a way to deliver what our customers really needed in this early phase of these large, complex urban sites. And what we did was that we tried to put. I used to work in a large multidisciplinary firm, and we had all disciplines there. And what we did was to build up this expert team that only worked with with these sites from start, with all disciplines in-house from the start, right? So you put all of these experts that you need in these projects at the table from day one. But what we found out was that, or I found out, was that even if you put everybody in the same room, it doesn't solve the problem, because the problem of urban sites, and when you have so many things that you need to consider, and so many of them are constraints, and they're actually able to test systematically, and much of them require computation and calculations. So you need to kind of go back to your expert tool and check this out, right? So it becomes this linear process where a designer comes up with a proposal and then an engineer needs to check it. So it's a very kind of linear process. But the problem that I felt was that the process was broken. You needed to go from that linear process into a more iterative process, where you could have all the information inside at once, so that you could test much more, which you need to do when you have this solution space that is infinite. But at the same time, you needed decision support, because this world you open up when you all of a sudden can explore all of these options across all of this different aspects, then you need guidance as a human being, because humans are really good at coming up with ideas or ask questions, but computers are really good at answering them. So the idea that we founded Spacemaker on was to take the entire process and say, okay, let's rebuild the process. Let's build all of these experts tools together, including the drawing tools and the analysis tools, and then use the benefits of this newly advanced technology, of both all the algorithms, but also the computing power, and see how can we help humans in this process, not replace them and just solve it with a silver bullet, but really help these people iterate together. So that's really our vision and our mission, and that's what we founded the company on. And as I said, my co-founder Carl, he had worked with AI systems or deep learning systems he took his master's degree in that like 14 years ago or something. So he was very early interested in this, but he also did a double. So he did also major in finance and business, because he's really interested about the value that the technology brings, not the technology in itself. So both he and, of course, a third founder, Anders, who came from a decade of management consulting and a business guy, like this was what united us was the huge value potential that we could see, that we could create this value for the people who were solving these problems, but also for the projects. And these urban projects are not only for the people who buy or rent an apartment or work at an office space, but it's also for the people using the city. And we saw that these projects could really benefit from rethinking this process, and AI was just kind of a lever into that. But what we saw was that this problem was not something that we just saw in Scandinavia. As you said, I'm from Scandinavia, and we started there, but we saw that this urban population is a problem, rapid growing urban population is a problem across the world, and the problem is quite similar across the world, even though the solutions might be different, or there's nuances to the solution to each market. It's a super local industry. We still saw that the problem was very global, and our approach could be scalable. So that's when we kind of decided that, okay, we need to really, this is our big chance. We can really leverage this opportunity and build a global technology firm that can scale across different countries. And like when we were born in a country with 5 million inhabitants, so we quickly realized we need to jump out of the Nordics and make this scalable in other markets. So I think that's also one of the benefits of starting a technology firm in Europe, is that your market is not a many 100 million people market. So you quickly need to build a scalable offer that can adapt to different needs in different markets. So we are already present, and this software is being used across many different countries in Europe. And we have people, as you said, at MIT or next door to MIT and Harvard in Cambridge. So we have, I think we're actually spread across 8 or 10 different countries now. And the software is being used by the largest real estate developers in Europe. Many of them are French, which is a big market for us in Europe. Others are Scandinavian markets. We're scaling out across US now. Is our kind of next wave. We, as you said, we raised the Series A funding round last summer of $25 million with Atomico and Northzone, two venture capital firms that joined us, and that was to kind of start the rapid scaling. So since then, we have launched in 3 or 4 new markets, and we're kind of rapidly expanding into new markets. And that's very interesting, because once you enter a new market, it's a completely different culture. It's a completely different regulation. It's completely different.
My apologies. Sorry, I've just discovered that for some reason my recording was not working. It is working now. We're going to have to start again. It's better to start now than before. I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
I'm already, Neil,
yeah?
Neil, I'm also recording, so it's fine, I think.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you're recording. Okay, so maybe we can edit them together then.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that then. Okay, sorry. Okay, good. All right, thank you.
No problem. No, so I might as well jump into the software. I'm ranting off here with our story, but I think it's really interesting to give just a backdrop of the problem we're solving, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, okay, how can we use the benefits of this new technology and make it into a applied use case? Applied meaning applied in a very fragmented industry, which is spread. It's a very local and fragmented industry, and people are working in different ways, and it's a very analog industry. So we need to make it applied and usable. And our biggest, if I should kind of sum up our focus over these 5 years since we started working with this in 2015, we founded the company in 2016. It's been iteration. We've been iterated and iterated and iterated with the market, because if you are to make an applied software, you really need to understand how these people who are working out there can make this very advanced technology applied in their workshop. So I think one of the things that we're most proud of is that we have users who went from drawing by hand into using AI. And today, all of the kind of advanced technology tools that are out there are really, really good if you're a parametric design geek, right? If you have a head where you like to decompose things and work parametric, but most users are not, right? Most users are stressed, they're constrained on time, they learning a new tool is a pain for them, they don't have the time or resources, and they have a pressure of delivering the project. So really being applied is understanding how we can benefit from these very advanced technology and make it usable. So we were very proud last year when we won the kind of Oscar for interaction design with Spacemaker tool. So that's I think that's a good bridge for showing you the tool, but I'll only show you a very quick video demo here, just a minute, and then we could rather kind of jump into the details later, but just to give you a glimpse. So I will share my screen, and just let me know if you can't see it. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Very short glimpse there, but was it working okay? Was it lagging, or?
There was no sound, but it was working okay.
Yeah, the sound was just the background music. So okay, I thought you heard the sound, so that's why I didn't talk on top of it. But mainly, I could just give you a quick description of what you saw. What you saw is a tool, obviously a site, a demo site right next to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, but a site where what we did was we set up the site, so a digital representation of the site where you basically just input the address and then comes up, and then we fetch the data. So within minutes you're set up to start exploring designs on the site. And then, as I said, to really understand the user and to make this generative design capabilities and this guiding support that AI can give you, to make it applied, we have also built out like drawing capabilities, analysis capabilities. You can import and export from other software. We've basically made it possible for them to use it in their workflow. So the tools or the method that you saw here were just some examples where you could do everything from just manual drawing into generating and getting guided support. We call it like an AI on your shoulder, giving you support, nudging you. If you ask the computer to say, okay, let's fix these footprints, let's just fix the heights, or what's the ideal trade-off between these two things? It's actually like making it possible for the user to work with everything from using their intuition into having the AI on your shoulder actually kind of being one step ahead of you and give you guided support. And as you saw, generate thousands of proposals, navigate for you, find the Pareto optimal ones. These kind of things that other generative design tools also try to solve, but put into the workflow of the user. So, and then a lot of compare mode, a lot of other fun stuff, but we can do that another time.
Okay, thanks. That's great. We don't have any constructed projects as yet to see, but I imagine there must be many in the works.
Yes, there's been hundreds of projects that have been, already been using Spacemaker. But since we, as you said, were founded only 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and these projects typically last many years. So the earliest ones that were, I guess, three years ago are maybe some of them are being finished next year. It takes a long time in Europe and developing urban complex sites. But there's been hundreds of projects. We have many big development firms these subscriptions are applied into the team. So there's project teams across Europe working on this. Many of them in the largest development firms like Bouygues Immobilier, for example, in the largest developer in France. So there's real world projects going on using this right now, but none of them are complete yet. No.
Okay, great. So maybe we could hand over to Wanyu and get the Xkool introduction. Wanyu, please.
Yeah, thanks for Havard. Seriously, it's really exciting for me to see what you're doing, because I don't know how, but we are in totally different two sides of the world, and we think really very, very similar. I was an architect, and I also found the very repetitive work of the design, and found we really need to speed up our own efficiency. So that is the original reason why I'm doing Xkool here. But there's also a history before that. I was a study in architecture design combining with computer science. So that back to 2000 something, yeah. And after graduation, I did a software with my partner in 2010. And that moment, we already start to think maybe it's good to have an assistant that is a computer that really could do CAD, computer aided design, not just the computer aided drawing. So we did a software for a developer from Korea, and that one is kind of stupid at this moment if we look back, but it was a quite interesting project. That software can generate schemes out from one of the specific land, and with a lot of parameters. But each time of the calculation, we need 3 days to get a lot of outcomes, like hundreds of outcomes, and then there's no way to define which one's good, which one's bad. And at the moment we think, oh, no way, and there's no way we can really figure it out. So we kind of gave up that model and looking for some opportunity to develop. But that is very fortunate enough. There's a lot of new techs comes out from 2010 to 2006. So we gradually introduced like cloud computation and big data and deep learning, a lot of things we involving the platform. We found, well, maybe it already look okay at 2016. So we all quit from the X companies. Like OMA was worked there for 8 years and then I quit, and we all into Xkool, and then we're back to Shenzhen to do it. We are also 4 years now, and we think there's still a long way to go. I don't know if you think the same, but seriously, it's a really difficult thing to do because architecture is a really traditional business, and it's very sophisticated and complicated. Not only the design itself, but also the relationship with the client, with the public, etc. So really have a lot of things to go on with. I will later also show something from our side, but I really want to ask some question to Havard. Maybe later we can have this discussion. It's what's a business model you're doing, and what kind of strategy you're using to go into other countries, because we are only doing in China, because we found in other countries the regulations are all different, and the code's different, the data is all different. Maybe the data is the same, but the code, the regulation, the culture, a lot of things are really difficult to deal with, and it needs really long time to go on with. Back to what we are doing, I'm gonna show something. I don't know if I can share my screen. Wait a second. Sorry, hold on. Let me show this. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
This image?
Oh,
Okay,
no.
cool.
We just
No?
lost it.
Okay, can you see it now? Maybe
Yes.
there's some delay. You
No.
see it?
Yes.
I
Okay,
can't see
cool.
it.
You can't see it,
No.
okay.
Daniel, can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Yes, it's my internet is not stable on the screen now. Okay, Neil, can you see my screen?
I can't. I don't know. I've got a Mac, so maybe it's that. Don't worry. Keep going.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I can describe what this image about. There's I don't know, hundreds of different images. Shows a well-designed modern house. Yeah, but those images are all generated by the AI. And this one we did it in beginning of 2018. Yeah, and we can also like enlarge it. It looks quite well designed, and this is all outcomes of the computer. When we saw those outcomes, we found it's really fascinating. But the thing is, how can we use those things to what kind of a stage? It is a video. I don't know if you can see because of the internet delay. Can you see the video? Hello?
It's lagging a bit, so
Okay.
I see some images, but I don't see a video now.
Yeah, that's a pity. Anyway, it's just the process
I think if you turn off
of
your
the
own,
generating. Yeah. Can you see this is still image?
I think if you turn off your own camera, like if you turn off the video, the bandwidth will probably be a bit better.
Turn off. working? Hello? Hello?
Daniel?
We can hear you, but the video is not
Okay.
working.
This is not a video, now it's a image, still image.
Okay.
Now we can
I
see.
think
Okay. Okay, cool. Then I explain. This image is showing the process of architectural concepts, which was always forming in our head, in our brain. But nowadays, with AI, we can show the process from scheme A to scheme B to scheme C. What's the difference in between? And we can froze at some moment to say, okay, this is what I want. So this is a very interesting point. We found AI could help people to get the design done. But only for image use is not really enough. I think I will skip all those videos. Seems
it's working quite good now. I think the video works
okay.
better now. I think it helped
Okay.
that you switched off the camera.
Okay, cool. And then this thing you saw here is it's new. What we do from last year, and it's not new anymore. It's from last year. That is the interface. We can draw as the input, and on the right side it can generate by AI with some kind of image showing how the idea can be formed into those kind of images. So this is some kind of fun application, but we're not just doing fun thing. We also do serious AI applications. So we think this kind of a creation can based on AI and can do a lot of things in terms of discrimination, evaluation, reconstruction, and generation. I won't show too long because it's a lot of things. Reconstruction, as you can see from the previous ones and this one as well, we can input some renderings, and we can combining with some kind of live view, and we can switch the image from day view to night view. Yeah, it's a kind of a reconstruction thing. And discrimination is something we introduced in 2018 Digital Futures workshop, and this one was using AI to help the researchers to define what is the active zone and the passive zone of the street with the Google Street Maps. And this one was another workshop we did with Tongji Digital Future last year. And this one is we do evaluation also with the street view images. And we can build this small app with the students in a week. And the students can select their own algorithms, upload to this platform, and select the streets they want to analyze with, and then different parameters or values they want to evaluate with. Sorry, my internet seems unstable. And then you can get the results. So the computer or the AI can help you to define what is the zone with a lot of green views, where is the zone is very high dense or with less public space, etc. A lot of things we can dealing with the street views. So this is a kind of application with evaluation. All those analyzing won't be so depends on human experience, but more rely on the data analyzing and more quantitative, or we can really to specify what is the good part, what need to be developed, let's say. The generation part I just showed, and to the design, I think is most important thing. I think Havard also showed his space AI, Spacemaker AI. I think it looks very similar in a way, but I don't know what stage are you doing with we are dealing with the plot scale at this moment, and also involving into the building block scale. So this is what we do. We're trying to combining the human intelligence with the machine intelligence and the artificial intelligence. So in our opinion, the man and machine got this type of a relationship. So in the beginning, people do a lot of the work and the machine do less. But eventually, people will do less and less, and the machine will do more and more in terms of the labor job. But what will people do is people will do something extra, more higher level. Yeah, this is what we are thinking, and we're thinking of this architects. Yeah, where architects can go. We think there's a lot of things architects can do, more creational and more specific work to do. So we translate into our product is we combine efficiency, creativity, and synergy together. So this is what our platform looking like. And nowadays we already have a lot of real cases in China, and this is our popularity in terms of the location. So a lot of provinces all over China. So as a conclusion, I think what is missing today is not the technology capability of AI design, but the thinking of AI design. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Wanyu. Can I just clarify the last point there? The thinking of AI design, you're saying, what do you mean by that exactly? It's for people to think that way, for architects to think that way? Okay, okay.
Yes, there's also extra explanation for this. It's not just the thinking of using AI to do the design, but also how to use the AI. So we always say design thinking, but what is the AI design thinking? It's different. For instance, when we do traditional way of design, we draw something and we get something, that's it. But with AI, you have to understand what's your input and what the output could be. And is there anything related to the data, related to the logic? So this is a different way of design.
Mm-hmm. I think, Havard, that was very kind of similar to some of your comments about the different way of approaching design. It requires a different mindset, shall we say?
Yes, it does. And that's what's so fascinating about this, right? Because I couldn't agree more about your last slide there, that it's not about the capabilities of the technology. The technology exists, it works. We saw very early that the technology we developed could create amazing results. But the reason why we've been iterating is because it's about implementation. It's about understanding how this technology can be applied and how it can be adopted. And I think what we have seen is that I guess this is a more of a kind of trying to understand psychologically what is going on, but it's also about understanding architecture, and understanding architecture isn't possible to just do and say like this is how architecture works, right? Because it's what we experience many times is that many of our users, they want to reinvent, this industry is called a blank sheet industry, right? You start from scratch every time. And it's not because people they don't know that standardization or thinking systematically is a benefit, right? It's not about that. It's about architecture being it's a benefit to architecture that you kind of reset your mind and start all over again every time. So in one way, you have this force that is pulling you towards tailor making every project, rethinking the process every time. And then on the other hand, you have technology, which really, one of the things that technology does really good is putting things into a system, right? So one of the kind of prerequisites for succeeding is that you need to think systematically about what you're doing. And one example is this parametric mind. Like there are a few people, I would say out of 10 people, maybe 2 people have that in their mind. I know there's a lot of research around being a maximizer versus a satisfier. In I think that's more of the kind of commercial industry of how people want to buy something and then they get buyer's remorse, etc. But there's a lot of research that's gone into that. And if only 1 out of 5 is a maximizer, meaning they don't, like a satisfier is a person who is satisfied with the first good proposal you come up with, right? Which is good enough. And then a maximizer is never satisfied. They always try to say like, okay, but there is a better proposal out there. If I just do like this, I keep going. I think many architects are maximizers in their way. It's kind of what you're trained at school. You want to just iterate and rethink and keep working and working and working. But at the same time, if you don't enjoy thinking systematically and parametric about it, then going into this very parametric world where you need to describe what you want to do before you get the output, that's really hard for people, right? So there are some things that are aligned in a way with what we're trying to do, and some things are working very contradictory. And that's really a challenge. So that's why we have, from day one, we've just said, I remember in 2017, we just said, okay, all the ideas that we have for what to do, let's just scrap them and let's just start listening to our users and iterate and see how they can use it, because you think you understand them, but you don't. And another aspect of that is also, as you said, how do you take this into different markets? And different markets also mean different cultures, right? If one thing is digital maturity, one thing that we have been very focused on is that our early customers needed to be early adopters of technology, of course. They needed to have like digital transformation in their agenda, but as a company, but also as individuals. They needed to have a culture where it was okay to test new things, and etc., which has been really important for us as well, right? But the other aspect that you can't control is how different the culture is in different markets and how digital mature they are. And there's a bunch of ways that you can measure that, but the only way to really find out is really jumping out there and try, right? Because that's when you see the dynamics between, like you said, the dynamics between the developer, the architect, the engineer, the contractor, the municipality. These things are very different to different markets as well, and they play in as well. So I guess the challenge is really big, but it's also what makes this so exciting. Neil, you're muted.
Right.
Could I just jump in there? Thank you. One of the things we're trying to do with these panel discussions is to kind of contextualize everything in the context of COVID-19, which of course has been much of a kind of game changer for many architectural offices. I mean, maybe it's kind of coincidental that AI is coming onto the scene at this time, because both of your practices, you've been working this for years, but I think it has emerged as a kind of a dominant discourse in many places in the last few months, almost since the beginning of COVID itself in some ways. Certainly back in October at the Acadia conference in Austin, Texas, for the first time, there were 2 complete panels looking at AI, and there was also my paper was on the theory of AI. So all of a sudden it hit the scene, and it was a big thing. And I think that many schools of architecture now, I wouldn't say many, but some of the leading schools of architecture are now running projects based on AI. Certainly this last year with my students, I've been basing things on AI. So it's around now. And almost the same time that COVID arrived in some ways, because it was November when it appeared, and October, November was when the first exhibition on AI appeared then. So it's very much, they're kind of contemporary. And they're also similar in some ways that they're invisible. But people often think, well, what is AI? And they expect maybe an office full of robots. But the point about AI is it's already here. It's surrounding us. It's on our cell phones and things. And we don't even know it's there half the time, as is COVID itself. But I think more importantly, and I know there's been an article that was that has been written about your work, Havard, that it's actually coming into its own in many ways with the kind of the situation in which we find ourselves as a result of COVID, working from home and so on. Do you want to say something about how, I'd be interested to hear both of you, from your both perspectives, what a change, how this has helped, how popular it's proved to be in the context of COVID-19, and how it's been helpful. Because in some ways, I think that once you start, in some ways, I think what you're both saying is that the mentality to use AI has not necessarily been there, but then once you discover how useful it is, people change the way they operate. I think the same's been happening with many things, that people hadn't imagined the possibility of Zoom meetings and hadn't thought about ordering their groceries online, even though they do. And now people get used to it, and I suspect it's going to be a kind of game changer, and people are going to carry on doing many of those kind of things. So I'd interested to know what experience you've had actually of how it's impacted the office in the age of COVID-19.
Definitely. Would you like to go first, Wanyu? I feel like I'm doing all the talking here, so but I'd love to answer that.
Okay.
But you can go ahead first. I can.
Okay. Okay. Actually, China is the first country get hit by this coronavirus, and at that moment it was just the Chinese New Year. But I was with Neo actually in LA at that moment. But anyway, when we went back to China, we found that a lot of things changed. All those offices are stopped working in offline, and we started in just the end of February online, and we start offline work and March and beginning of March. But I don't know if it's different because it's China, because Chinese people always want to do face-to-face talk. So there's no trust with like a video chat. Like the compromising of video chat is just for the most difficult time of the virus. So just the first 1 month. And afterwards, all those business are reopened. And now on the street, everything just looks normal here. Nothing like be hit by the virus. So everything still goes on as before. So we couldn't really see too much of changes with the virus condition. But at some moment, we have some discussion with the coronavirus. It do slow down all those process and the efficiency. But the people still, I don't think they still willing to take the new chance. I think maybe the turning point is not some kind of a event like this. It should be something else to turn this point. I don't know what that could be. Maybe a new way of working to everyone already accept. But this new way of working, not just online, the one step of closing to AI. But if we want to work with AI, there should be something else. So, for instance, the labor lacking, like in China now, a lot of construction workers, they are almost 50 years old. The average age of the construction workers on Chinese sites are like 45 or something, because there's no young people want to go to the construction site. They all go to deliver food, deliver all the packages, or drive the Chinese Uber, Didi. So nobody can go to the construction site. So in this way, the prefabrication become the most powerful infiltration, and that gonna take most of the construction method in the future. So I think could be similar if architects got a lot of work to do, and this market is booming, and that might be, and we don't have that much people to do this job, then we might really need AI. So I think that could be one possibility. Yeah, that's it.
And also when it comes to COVID and switching to this kind of remote work or something, I agree with you that it has to be something more than just this big event, COVID, for things to change. Because if you're looking also, let's look at VR, AR, you'll expect that now will be the boom for VR and AR. Now will be the moment to go full virtual reality. because now you have COVID, you have to be inside, and it didn't materialize. So I think all these technologies, they need something more than just one event like this, yeah, materialize, yeah. And probably has to do also something with what Harvard is talking about, like understanding, you know, if the client actually needs that, the customer needs those technologies, and then how you tailor those technologies for the customer, yeah. Probably then they are going to take off, but probably one event like this alone probably is not enough, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very interesting topic, and I think I completely agree that like COVID is interesting. It's interesting to see some sort of correlation. Like we're data driven, of course, so we like to look at the numbers and see kind of what can the numbers tell us. And so far, the numbers have kind of told us that usage on our platform has never been higher. We saw an explosion of usage once COVID hit, and we try to understand why. It might have been because people all of a sudden had time to learn new tools from home, but we think, or one of kind of the strongest hypothesis is also that what we have done is to build expert tools together and put it in the cloud. So when everybody had their own expert tool, even if that tool was put into the cloud, the collaboration part of it needs to happen where you have two tools built into one, right? Where you can sit in the cloud and discuss and iterate together. So one thing that we found really interesting, if I go back to kind of the problem of this industry where you have different experts, and like if I zoom out even more, the macro trend is that you need these experts, you need them more and more and earlier, right? So if you have all of these experts that needs to be giving insight and information into the process as early as possible, if you put that process in a collaborative way or collaborative tool like that, what we have seen to be very useful is that faster iteration really changes how you work. So it's not, or to give you an example, we have one of the engineering firms that collaborate with us is Sweco. So it's Swedish origin, but a European office. I think they have 15,000 employees, and especially the acoustic engineers, just to take an example. If previously, if you wanted to know how much kind of noise you had on your site, you needed to call an engineer. They needed to rebuild their process or the project in their tool, and then run a simulation, write a report, send it back, right? It's so slow. But all of a sudden you can just say, hey, can you just log in and watch this proposal? And then the noise simulation has already been run, right? All of a sudden that acoustic engineer can jump on the call, you can sit together and watch that analysis and discuss the impact of that, and even say, okay, what if you rotate this building a bit, or what if you do this, and what if you do that? And what's interesting, and I really liked your slide there, Wanyu, of kind of if more of the work that people do today is being done by the machine, humans will always find something else to do in a way. And it's also about opening up a world, because there are so much things that humans need to do. What we see is that if you compare that noise situation that I just described with the old way of doing it, you take the time down from weeks to just an hour, right? But that doesn't mean that the acoustic engineer is cut off with a lot of time. What it means is that the acoustic engineer that was previously not involved in the project before, maybe a year down the road from the project started, is now involved from almost day one. And that the benefit of that is that they get access to the project where the possibility to have impact is much higher and the cost of doing changes is much lower, right? So you get this effect, but you also put the topic on the agenda very early. And with these urban sites, one of the biggest problems when you need to build faster and denser than before, and there's new ways of building and everything, one of the big challenges is that you compromise on qualities, and you lose out on building a more sustainable urban project because you're constrained on time. There's so much to think about, so you just move on, right? But if you get that information earlier on, we see that the impact of the projects becomes better. It becomes more profitable and it's more efficient, but more importantly, you take into account these very important topics from day one, right? With energy usage, with daylight issues, with noise, with stormwater handling, with wind simulations, with all these things that we need to take into account very early on in urban projects. Yeah.
If I may I add to that? I think there is another dimension to especially the Corona situation, actually. For one is obviously everyone had to work remotely, and collaborative platforms are incredibly helpful to facilitating that. But the other one is the complexity of urban planning itself, which has, urban planning has become more and more complex over the last decades or so with increased regulations, etc. And what history has shown is that, even the Spanish flu pandemic or other health crises have resulted in, I would argue, better urban planning or different urban planning, but definitely more pressure on urban planners themselves with more criteria that they need to meet. And if we see the hotspots of Corona, the hotspots are usually big cities. And if we think about that, more and more people will still be moving to cities. There is going to be a lot more pressure on affordable housing, on density, on access to services, connectedness within the city, but also within the region. And if you need to take all of this into consideration, that's an incredibly massive task for any urban planner. And I think that's where we so far have been underestimating good data and the data-driven platforms and how they can help with that. And we firmly believe at Spacemaker that we need good data and data-driven urban planning in order to meet these different challenges over the course of the next decade. And iteration basically also means that projects that are in the works now, even within a city now, could potentially actually be rectified right now without incurring too many additional costs, and actually looking at, would we need to maybe make changes to facilitate something like a pandemic, or it could be another crisis. But I think what Corona has really shown is that data is key to resilience. The whole pandemic was incredibly data driven. We have had access to great data. And now the question is, how do you translate that to the urban planning sphere?
Can I pick up on that, Mary? Thanks. That was interesting. But I have 2 points. One is a comment that Thomas Heatherwick has made, and that is to say, is the office a kind of a thing of the past? The idea of all coming into the city centre and to go and work in an office, and of course that will differ from different countries. In the UK, where Heatherwick's based, there's a lot of commuting. There are a lot of satellite towns around London, and many people take the train into work. And that, of course, is a potentially hazardous situation. And he's asking the question whether the office itself, this idea of everybody coming together in a single space, is not itself a kind of a dinosaur, something of the past, when we might begin to sort of increase to working remotely. The second point, which is actually something that maybe we won't see evidence of maybe too soon, although we are, I think, begin to see that. And that is to say that in some cities, especially New York, that suffered terribly from coronavirus, that there is a kind of a shift away from the city center itself, from dense urban cities towards other environments. And this is something that Peter Eisenman is talking about. And I've noticed certainly in terms of New York that there is already a shift towards the countryside, towards suburbanism. I'm based in Los Angeles, which of course was regarded as the worst version of urban sprawl until recently. Now people see it as an example of an urbanism of social distancing. Somehow it's been reprieved in some way. And I think one of the interesting things I always thought about being able to work remote is not that place is unimportant. Actually, if you can work anywhere in the world, then place is supremely important. It is the most important thing. And you could literally, so I could sort of see, I mean, I'm fortunate living on Venice Beach. I could see places up in the mountains and things and on the beach and so on as being the kind of desirable spaces to work to shift to. So there are two factors there. One is the kind of whether the old practice of working in the office is on the way out, and also whether urbanism itself, dense urbanism, is going to be kind of called into question. And I guess we as architects have got nothing to say about that, but it's going to be the developers who call the tune. And in fact, not the developers so much as the people who are purchasing things. So I just want to throw that out there as a kind of comment.
Yeah, super interesting. Absolutely. I mean, we are, of course, I think, together with many, like most companies in the world right now are considering, like, what can we learn from having worked remote for months? What are the benefits and what are the challenges, and what can we kind of bring forward? And one of them is, of course, opening the discussion of density and urbanism, and as you said, kind of an urbanism of social distancing, which I think was quite a good way of putting it. Like maybe you can say that urbanism is a result, like the urbanization is a result of many things, such as and as is the urban site being developed. It's a multiple trade-offs. There are many things to consider, and there are many drivers, right? And so is it, like, that's the same thing with urbanism. It's a political thing, but it's also, you know, there are so many things that are pulling us together. So like COVID is only one thing that is now pulling us kind of to suburbia. And I think this, like Maria put it, this is just another example of the premises for urban planning are changing, and they will probably just change and change and change. So the task of an urban developer is it's not possible to say that it's a like a handcraft or a profession that you develop and now you know how to develop urban sites. It will probably just keep changing faster and faster, right? So I think what we need to do is we need to prepare ourselves for actually being able to build in different ways and meeting the future.
But you would like to say something?
I think, yeah, I kind of agree with a lot of it, but my I think my Wi-Fi is not so good. I heard a lot of delays, so I don't know, did I catch all of your conversation or not really? But yeah, I think the coronavirus really changed how people work and also the workspace. When I was in OMA, we did a lot of research on workspace. And also recently RIM's working on the countryside. I always thinking if all those infrastructures can be utilized to everywhere. So countryside maybe means no difference with the cities. For instance, what the space I mean, Xspace is doing right now is this space Wi-Fi. And if space Wi-Fi is really covering the world, do we really need to living in the city, or can we order like Amazon from the countryside and get all those things be delivered? And maybe we can also work in the countryside. People no need to be locked up, but they like naturally separated. So that may be also a way of the future.
Daniel, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so personally, I'm still in a way thinking if it's really that's the right answer, like this kind of almost like binary, you either you're in the city or you're outside. And I think people are they want to be social, they want to interact. And I think it's just in the end, it falls on our side, on architects or urban planners to figure out ways how to design spaces that are also keeping in mind this aspect of pandemics or something. Yeah. And right now, the thing is, we are in a period where actually we have so much access to data, and we are going to have even more access to data. Yeah? So just imagine that every single architectural element is going to start to broadcast in a way its information. Every single architectural element is going to be in a way will have a sort of sensor or something. So in the end, all these buildings, they are going to be like this kind of generators of information about everything, like who opened that door and what's the pattern of the opening doors, and how people are interacting in the space and all those things. So I think in the end, I think the answer will be mostly in that kind of more gray, like more range, where we have access to this data. And we as the designers and architects and the developers, we have to think, okay, what kind of new strategies now we can develop out of this. So I think also if you think about the future of the office, if you're looking from a sort of process, not so much like how we meet in an office, but in the end, we might end up with architects having to submit like data instead of floor plans or something, and then prove in a way that their data actually performs after the building starts to be used, for example, So I think mostly for me personally, the lesson that I'm learning from COVID is mostly that, it's mostly about how we integrate in a smarter way, data-driven processes in the design workflows,
I mean, one of the things I can't help thinking, because we're looking at Daniel with the backdrop of deep Himmelbau design, but it's interesting the way that I think internal spaces have been become almost interactive in a way. That's just a kind of backdrop for a Zoom thing, but one begins to imagine that if the home becomes the office, that actually that's going to lead to a different form of interactive space in which we're operating, where internal spaces will be mutating and changing, and we have a different form of environment. One thing that I wanted to
sorry, can I just add one comment, because I totally agree. It's what you both said there. It's about the private and the work life that becomes more integrated. And I think personally, I feel like my day has gone from, if you say that it's like 16 hours that you previously had very kind of defined that you were either at work or home, kind of feels like my work day has become 16 hours, but my private day has also become 16 hours. So they kind of integrate. And I think a good thing about work and a private life being more integrated, I mean, there are many challenges, like how do you then balance social life or your private life and your work life? But one of the benefits is that a very specific example that I heard yesterday from one of the CEOs that we know very well in a real estate firm. He said that one of the most important things they do is, of course, the discussion with the municipality, right? The planning authorities about what they can do on the site, and the discussions around regulations, etc. And historically, that has been a process where you kind of show up at the planning office, like you have your PDFs, there's a meeting, there's set aside an hour, you're presenting the proposal, they're not saying anything. It's a very kind of rigid process where the dynamics is not that good, right? It's really kind of one way. And then what they saw change now, that the planning authorities also needed to keep doing this, but over video, was that they were working from home and were interrupted by their kids coming in, kind of created this other dynamic where you also kind of became closer, even though you were not physically in the same room, which also did something to the dynamics, because it was more kind of two equal people sitting together and discussing. And there's another dynamic to that, which is that if you're in a room where some people are in the physical room and some are digital, you always get this dynamics where the people in the room start small talking. There's things you can do in the room that you can't do in video. So I think this is really interesting about this whole remote dimension. Just a interesting story there.
One thing that in previous discussion, Havard, I found really interesting is, I mean, both you and Wanyu, your clients are developers are quite substantial part of your clientele. What I wanted to just open up was the question: to what extent developers are expecting architects to start using AI. Is that going to be a kind of a driver of change, even more so than our present condition? Havard, I know your views on that, but well, maybe you want to kick off. Yeah.
I'd love to. Yeah, no, that's right. The developers are kind of driving the project. That's where the project sits, and we're building a collaborative tool. So our tool sits with the project, right? So that's why we believe that all the stakeholders around the table needs to be present. So the architect, the developer, the engineers, etc. So what we have seen is that developers they work with portfolios, right? So even though they're starting from scratch every time, they still have a machinery of projects. They buy a site, they develop it, and then buy another site. So I think what we have seen is that especially the large firms, they typically and the ones who are digital mature, they have digital agendas, right? So when they require, and they do, many of them do, we've actually many examples where developers who have seen the effects of introducing a new way of work, they start requiring it. So they write to the architects that they invite into a competition, for example. They say, we expect you to work in Spacemaker. You need to work in Spacemaker or a similar tool or something like. If it's another tool, like I know BIM tools, they're doing the same, right? They're saying we need you to work with BIM. We expect that from you. So they're doing the same now with Spacemaker, saying you need to work with Spacemaker from day one. And it's not because they need to force it on architects, but I think it's a good way of driving digital adoption. And architects are, our main user of the tool. And we see them also wanting to use it. So it's not that you need developers to do it it's not forcing them to do it, but it is definitely driving adoption. And it could be the other way around as well, right? If an architect came to a developer and saying, hey, I have this very advanced tool, can you or how do you see me using it? I think it's very positive also that it's both a push and a pull. Because this is an ecosystem where working in a different way means that all parties will be involved in it. So you kind of need it to be a push and a pull in a way.
Wanyu, do you want to comment on that? Have you had a similar experience in Shenzhen?
Yes, I think the most important thing is how to get to the developers most here items, or what is the most important thing. I think Chinese developers, maybe also for the other developers, they are all as investors. So what they want is ROI. How can we help them to elaborate their ROI is the most important thing. If AI can help them on this, so developer has no reason to say no. They will embrace AI, and they will ask all their suppliers, not only just architects, all their suppliers, contractors, to use AI. So I think we need to solve the core issue. Yeah.
What? Sorry, ROI means?
Return on investment.
A return on investment.
Yeah.
This. I mean, maybe I could just add something to that. So, in many ways, I think it was Havard mentioning the difference between these maximizing and other techniques and things. That in many ways, what AI can do is present an optimal solution for the site. That, to my mind, I know in terms of the developers have been interested in kind of a platform that brings people together and so on, but to my mind, that must be a secondary reason, I think, why it's going to be adopted, is that the client can guarantee that AI will produce or will find in the search process, will find the optimal solution. And I'm particularly interested when sometimes that optimal solution is not something that an architect would have thought about. This is kind of a question that's been raised by Mike Haley. We have our own kind of biases, and we think in a kind of certain way. And sometimes AI will surprise us in coming up with a solution that we wouldn't have thought of. And I like to go back to this very famous game of AlphaGo, where Lee Sedol was competing against AI, and in a match that everybody assumed AI. Lee Sedol was one of the world leaders at Go. Everyone assumed that nobody could beat Lee Sedol, especially not a computer. And then there was this one particular move that came in game 2, move 37, that had never been played before, and initially they thought it was a mistake. It was kind of the smile came over certain people that this is a computer glitch. But then later on they discovered that this wasn't a mistake. In fact, there were a series of what they called slack moves. In other words, moves they couldn't explain, but ultimately were ones which proved to have been very effective. And so often the question comes of whether AI is going to find a solution that the most experienced of architects would maybe not have imagined in their first place. Havard, you've got
but I think this is a bigger discussion also. Like if you remember, in a way, Elon Musk is talking about this issue of the broadband between human and the machine. Yeah, and right now we are quite limited as humans. Like, and I think this is one big, in a way, challenge is like, okay, how you, because you're saying, the machine is creating something new, like that unexpected, but how you as a human can identify that as being something new and not being an error, so that's I think that's a super big challenge, because we are working, like we were talking like about urban planning. There are so many variables in play, and each variable, it's a nonlinear, in a way, system in the end. It's not like there is a direct correlation between changing one variable and you have an effect. There is a nonlinear effect happening there. So I think the big challenge is like how exactly you evaluate the result to really understand that that's actually a new move. With AlphaGo, I think it's simple because the game, it's black and white. Yeah, it's kind of straightforward. And not straightforward in that sense, but yeah, you know what I mean. But with architecture, there are so many variables. For me, it's like how we address that nonlinearity effect in way that happens there.
Exactly. And this is something I could have talked about for hours, because it's so interesting. But I couldn't agree more about what you say, because if you have a 10-dimensional problem, and many of them are competing, it's not possible to come up with a solution that just performs well on every parameter, right? There needs to be a trade-off. And architecture is, whether you like it or not, very much about finding good trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
And especially if you kind of start systemizing them. And there's an expression called Pareto optimal solution. So if you have an X and a Y axis, and then you have a proposal scoring well on both, it's kind of the Pareto front up here that are like, there's a bunch of solutions up here that will perform good on both. But if you have like a 10-dimensional, or in many cases a 100-dimensional problem, it's not possible to find the solution that just nails everything, right? So this is why the human needs to be in control of the parameters, and they need to kind of say, okay, what if I optimize for this? What happens then? What if I optimize for these two things? Or what if I want a proposal that is really good at these things? But the problem is that humans are not that good at weighting what they want before they see the outcome. They often want to see the outcome and then start evaluating it. So it's this fundamental problem of parametric design or generative design. But I think we saw one example very early, that what computers are good at, computers can actually also, or AI can actually empower creativity with people as well. I guess that's some of the point you're asking. Like, can the computer surprise us in a way? Can we find things that we couldn't thought about? Can we find proposed solutions to problem that we otherwise wouldn't come up with ourselves? And very early we saw that happening, right? We saw very early on, actually, in our journey, that we were able to produce solutions that were kind of surprising. You couldn't say why they were good, but you were trying to perform good on this and this and that. And then all of a sudden it came up this proposal that you just started looking at, and you said, like, I can't understand why this is good. Because as humans, it's a very visual discipline. We're very used to we're processing all of this information, and we're coming up with a proposal that is, in mathematical terms, a kind of a global solution to a problem. I think the best way to describe it is like a sports stadium. Like everybody is sitting like this because then you optimize for all to have an optimal view towards the stadium, right? But a machine could probably come up with a way that more people could sit denser and get a good view, right? But that's just a one-dimensional problem. So the problem becomes complex when you have, for example, daylight, which is opposite to blocking traffic noise, for example. So if like a daylight engineer could tell you to rotate the building here, then you will get more daylight into these 3 buildings in total. And then the traffic engineer would tell you that, but then you open up for more traffic noise. So you're very often stuck in this problem of coming up with intelligent patterns. And the problem today is that if you're planning hundreds of apartments, for example, and you want to think about how the daylight and the traffic noise and everything is for every single one of those 600 apartments, it's really, really hard to come up with this one concept that just nails it and comes up with the best way of getting maximum daylight for the bad ones, etc. And this is where we see humans are really good, because they love patterns, right? Computers love finding complex patterns. And you wouldn't, when you see it, you often don't understand why it's good. But there is, I can bring one example of a project in the Nordics, one of the early projects where they were working with this site, 600 apartments or 700 apartments. They were trying to, they had this noise situation and daylight, and they wanted view towards the park. They wanted to keep a minimum number of plan layouts. They had this list, like they always do, of 20 things they wanted to do. And they had come up with a concept that they thought was smart, like building quite a high wall here to block the noise and building up here to get the view, and these kind of like come up with a pattern. And the computer told them that it kind of the opposite was the good thing to do. Like where they wanted to build high was not the smart place to put it. It should be lower here. It should be higher here and lower there, etc. And the things that they solved with like putting up a long wall of buildings that block the noise that had a certain height, the computer could propose to, no, at exactly this point here, you can have 5 meters distance between the buildings. It wouldn't affect the noise. And noise are waves, right? They're reflecting, they're curving around objects. These phenomenons that we're planning for are really complex phenomenons. So this is where the computer could come up with a pattern that the architects just saw on the parameters were good. So this is where we call it, like the industry is calling it performance-driven design or analysis-driven design, right? Where you don't look at the shape in itself, but you look at the numbers and how they perform. And this is also the way you need to do it with computers, right? You need the computer, you need to trust the numbers in a way, more than saying that, okay, it's this design concept. So we kind of, this is where form and function kind of syncs together, and it's really becoming philosophical or about rethinking what is form, what is function, what is, yeah, and how they're doing so.
Why have you had similar experiences with Xkool?
Yeah, actually what I showed in the beginning with my slides are all those images are done by AI, and those buildings or those designs are never existing on the earth. So those are already the creations of the machine. But I'm really aware of the, we are like now the society is a little bit taking AI as a mess. So I don't think it's a good sign. AI cannot do everything. Sometimes they are more stupid than human. Like some projects or schemes, there's only one best solution, definitely, in terms of the ROI. But maybe human with experience, they can have the idea at their first glimpse. But the AI needs more time to do it. So I don't really think the AI can do everything. So as I mentioned in my previous slides, I really think AI should combining with the human intelligence and the machine intelligence. So only AI at this kind of industry can only do some recommendations, generations maybe, and analyzing yeah, those kind of things AI are good, and especially for the large amount of data dealing, such as big data analyzing. Those are not AI acting. Seriously, those are just the machine intelligence. We can do it in like many years ago, so nothing to do with AI. So I want the students or the architects also be aware of this. AI cannot do everything. We still need architects to work with the computer. Yeah.
I think what Harvard Rose brought up there was a kind of interesting question, actually philosophical questions in many ways, about the relationship between form, aesthetic, shall we say, and performance. And in some ways, I thought it was interesting, the example that Havard was talking about, where there was one particular building, I think you called it your giraffe project, Havard, where the solution was completely counterintuitive in some ways. And it was based on a kind of calculation. And from that point of view, you could see a connection between the simple, the way that the AlphaGo move went, which was a calculation, and the other aspects of architecture. In other words, there is a kind of calculation for the client, especially, of how you get the optimal solution. And then there's a kind of aesthetic agenda that comes in, which is actually really what architects do very well. You know, they know what is beautiful. And what I find astonishing is how quickly we can judge that. You know, you could sip a cocktail and you know exactly whether it's a nice cocktail. You could hear some music or taste some food or look at it. It takes a fraction of a second to judge these things. But in a way, it's almost always also the problem of architects, in the sense that we tend to think that unless it looks comfortable, it's not comfortable, let's say, or functional. So, you know, we might look at a Zaha chair and say that's going to be comfortable. Whereas actually, because it looks beautiful, whereas actually maybe there's a chair, a kind of Parker Knoll chair that maybe your grandmother sits in, that looks incredibly ugly, but it's very beautiful. And we would rule that out because it's not very, very beautiful. So it's almost like there's, in architecture, we have a kind of aesthetics of function, and rather than function itself. And I'm wondering whether we're going to be challenged by some of those issues by AI that's telling us, even though it doesn't look good, it is the best. It's almost like they're two different kind of registers that we operate in as architects.
Yeah, as I said, I could talk about this for hours because it's so interesting. And exactly what you said there is I think one of the biggest resistance of like that's holding back AI to be implemented is this idea of concepts. If you think about it, an architectural concept, what is an architectural concept, right? It's really a way of describing your solution in a simple way, right? But if the performance driven design will often come up with concepts, or like, let's not call it concept, let's call it like a building, like a distribution of mass on the site, right? That happens to be like buildings, right? If you call that pattern or whatever something, and you say it's not about the concept, I don't need to explain it. I don't need to explain it to some other person, like this is a concept, I did this to solve that, I did this to solve that, so that's why it looks like it does, right? If you don't do that, you just say that it's the parameters that count, then kind of the visual dimension of it becomes irrelevant in a way, right? And that's problematic for architects, of course, right? I'm an architect myself. And the aesthetics play a big role, because aesthetics is not just about facade design or something. It's like, as we all know, aesthetics is about experiencing shape, for example, and a space. And experiencing space can be a very emotional thing, right? And it's very hard to describe and understand for computers. So we always get the question, like, how is the computer able to handle these soft qualities? Or how can we make sure that we get these nice urban sequences of intimate spaces that we want to be in, etc. And this is where I think there is a bit of a counterintuitive or contradictory things working against each other, but at the same time will be solved, because as you all say, AI is not replacing a process. It's a powerful tool that can empower. We always say, like, AI is also architectural intuition. It's AI, it's architectural intuition. It's not artificial intelligence, because that's a very big and important part of it as well. And if you're able to make the tool empower this creativity, and you're open to it, then you can get some really actually new interesting architecture, right? This could potentially lead to very, very interesting architecture when these two things are able to play together, and also interesting urban design, right? Because you go from basing all your decisions, your design decisions on intuition, into basing them on both your intuition and and the performance.
But I think right now it's like this kind of relation between aesthetics and function. Right now, the reason why AI is used where it's used in architecture is because we have access to data. But when it comes to aesthetic, it's quite hard to quantify. To quantify exactly what you describe as being a good aesthetic or not. And I think also if you talk about concepts like architectural concepts, in the end, an architectural concept is something, if you translate that into a machine language, is something like I'm looking at a data set and then I have an autoencoder, and that autoencoder reduces the dimensionality of the data and then represents in a way, a very small space, dimensional space is displaying in a way the concept of that data, like the main features of that data. So that's a concept in the end. As an architect, you're doing exactly the same thing. You have a lot of ideas, a lot of like aesthetical in a way sensibilities, and then you're just compressing in a way into one single concept. So I think in the end, we can marry in a way these two function and aesthetics, but I think the challenge with aesthetics is like how you collect in a way and how you synthesize in a way data that actually describes correctly what the good aesthetic is and what bad aesthetic is. And then how the relation between the two, how the two are influencing each other.
Could I just chip in there? I think, Daniel, with the background, the background behind you, the deep Himmelblau image that was generated with Cyclegan, I think it was. What I find interesting right now is, of course, AI has exploded in the academic environment. Many schools, or I say many schools, but schools like SciArc, it's surprising how many studios are using AI. It is the cool thing. It produces some astonishing results, and in many cases it's quite inspirational. Michael Hansmeyer once commented somewhere to say that it's actually, what AI does is it's a form of news. It actually opens up possibilities that you could not have imagined before, and kind of becomes a kind of form of extended intelligence that opens up, it expands the possibility of what the architect might think of, and that in itself is kind of interesting. But I don't personally, my own conclusions, and I'm interested to know what you guys think, but my own conclusions, much as I like that kind of work, and my students are working on that now, and they're producing some astonishing results, much as I like the shocking new world of these interesting forms, and I think that's really what in some way inspires Wolf Prix, and in his lecture From Deconstruction to AI that he's going to be giving, I think the idea is somehow there's a new formal language that is emerging, that is, a new aesthetic and so on. But there's another side of the coin, which is to say, actually there's the working in the office in a very pragmatic way, and what AI can afford there in terms of coming up with the optimal performance solutions, and things maybe that architects themselves don't naturally think about. My thinking is this, and that is to say that from what Havard's been saying about clients, about developers insisting that their architects use AI, that's the main driver of change. It won't be aesthetics, it won't be the new style, that'll come and go. But what will be will last is the fact that the clients are expecting this. They're expecting this partly because they want to maximize the possibilities of their site. But also they want to produce buildings that are going to be performing much better in terms of whatever over time. And that, to my mind, in some ways, my speculation is, I want to bounce this off you guys and see what you think. My speculation is, at the moment we have a situation whereby sustainability is kind of the in thing, and people certainly in the States are falling over themselves to show that they are LEED certified and they're environmentally conscious and so on, and it's become a branding mechanism.
People will brand themselves based on how environmentally aware they are and how sustainable their buildings are, and so on and so on. My speculation is, my thinking is that actually that's going to happen with AI. That very soon AI is going to be a kind of branding mechanism for people. They're going to say, I use AI, I'm Leach certified, and so on. And that's going to be the driver of change within mainstream architectural practice, which I think opens up a whole new dimension that we were not thinking about in terms of what is going to be the driver of change. But that's going to be my conviction. Whether or not people are using AI, this is the interesting kind of question, because you don't know it's there half the time. And I know one architectural practice that has AI in its name. I won't mention them now. And I met the CEO in Shanghai, and I said, well, how are you using AI? And he said, well, we're not using it, actually. And it's a kind of branding mechanism. People sort of put it there because it's invisible. I mean, you know, in the end, you end up thinking, well, what is AI but the ultimate branding opportunity? I'm thinking particularly old.
Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
Unfortunately. No, I was saying unfortunately, because like with lead is the same thing. It's like in the end, yes, you just have a few that actually are true to their agenda, but the rest, they're just hiding behind the label. So of course, unfortunately, it's going to be like, yes. And I think this is going to hold back actually progress when it comes to AI and architecture, because instead of treating this very seriously and architects actually engaging with AI, they are just going to pretend that they are working with AI. And that will, in a way, just create this kind of false, in a way, impression that actually we are getting somewhere, when actually we are not, yeah. So it's the same also with lead, yeah. It's like, it's very easy to feel good about yourself that you're doing lead buildings, when actually you know for sure you're not doing that. Yeah, and you're never pushing forward, in a way, technology and everything. But yeah, this is, I mean, this is part of being human, I think.
Yeah, and it probably also has a bit to do with the lack of knowledge, right? AI is something that, at least currently, not, you know, a lot of people understand the surface of it, but they really don't understand kind of how it can be applied and introduced and used. And our team we're more than 100 people, and I think 70% of them are tech and product. So there's a large group of people who know a lot more about like AI systems than I do, and some of them are like really smart and crunching and doing really difficult problem solving. And my point is that AI is what we often talk about with AI now is exactly the things we just talked about. Like, okay, can this produce surprising form, right? Or can we traditionally, I mean, parametric design tools like Grasshopper and Dynamo has been on the market for 10 plus years, right? And we've seen a trend where many people use it to defend the complex form, right? It's a parametric, it's a way of producing a new form, right? But I think what's so powerful about AI and what I hope people will understand is that AI is just something that enables a lot of other things to happen. And as an example, we call what we do a hybrid AI system, because it's not like my CTO, my co-founder, he always says that self-driving cars are not a neural network on wheels, right? It's not just AI, right? AI has just made it possible to drive and build self-driving cars. But the complexity of introducing self-driving cars is huge, right? One thing is just building the car, making that possible, but then introducing it and what it does with changing the way we live and the way we work and the way we drive and the way regulations, everything. The complexity of self-driving cars is huge, right? And AI is being used across many dimensions. It's not just the self-driving or the neural network. And the same thing, we use AI, for example, to produce more digital data. Like in countries where we don't have digital data at the level we need, we can combine LiDAR data and satellite images and extract buildings and vegetation and everything, which is just where AI becomes a tool to make that happen. And then making that happen will make the process more digital. It will give you more informed decisions when you design, and so on and so on and so on. So, you know, AI is just an amazing kind of invention, but it's just something that leverage a lot of other things to happen. I think when we understand that, we don't necessarily get this polarized discussion of what AI is, and AI just becomes like the internet or something that nobody calls themselves like we're an internet company. We have a website, like it's just everything we do is online, right? So this is just a new kind of infrastructure, or a new thing that we will stop talking about, and we will definitely don't. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Wanyu, do you want to chip in some comment? Wanyu?
Yes, I have some connection problem. Anyway, I totally agree with you, Havard, because I don't think AI is something fancy, maybe at this moment, but in the future, AI just be the foundation of everything. So if we want to achieve something, AI is just part of it. We need to combine other powers of the computer and the human efforts. So I totally agree. This is the way how it should be. We solve problems with no matter what kind of technologies. We're not only involving AI as today we understand as deep learning, but we also involve with machine learning and other kind of methodology technologies. So I think the most important thing is to solve the issue with computer and help people to get more powerful way of working, like more efficient, and more possibilities be found, be discovered, be represented, and the entire working procedure become more easy to synergize with everyone in the team, in the project. So I think the outcome would be more important than the how.
One thing I wanted to kind of pick up on was the idea of what of how accessible AI is to use. I mean, Havard commented it has to be easy to use. In the past, the problem of, let's say, Grasshopper was only the geeks could use it. And there are two diametrically different opinions that have been put forward. I mean, one is this book here, I don't know if you know it, Super Users, Randy Deutsch, where he talks about how super users are going to be the future of architecture. And you imagine, we know already that the specialist modeling group at Foster's and Zaha Code and so on, there are many computational geeks who are sort of working there. But then actually a different view is put forward by Mike Haley of Autodesk, where he has a video which is kind of speculation of what it's like to operate in the office of the future. And his view is that that you will simply talk to your computer, and your computer will just kind of like, it'll be super easy. It'll just do it all for you and present these things, and you won't have to draw anything. It'll just be producing things, and then you'll say, can you revise this? Can you do this? And so on. I know Harvard's view is very much that it's going to be going towards the Mike Haley view to make it super, super simple. I'm interested in Wanyu, whether you've come up with a similar experience, whether you think it's going to make it more complicated or more easy, or both.
You mean the way people working with AI, with computer?
Will it make things easier? I mean, I'm thinking in some ways, because what AI does do already, I mean, in terms of facial recognition with my iPhone, it recognizes my face and it just switches on. So in many ways, and I think some of the kind of the operations in a cell phone, a mobile phone, they're all based on swiping. They're very intuitive operations. And if anything, we've seen the kind of shift. And I remember the days when my students were doing, Mel scripting, Rhino scripting, and so on. And then Grasshopper came and it became a bit easier. And now it seems that AI is making it even easier. Is that a kind of general trend that you see as happening?
I think this is also can link back to what I say. What we're missing is not the AI technology, it's the AI design thinking. I think it will make job easy with those basic jobs. Let's say with AI, you can get very easy to get very simple basic solutions. But if you want to go higher or higher requirements, higher standards, you need to think harder, even harder than today, to get what you want, because you need to understand how AI will performance with your inputs, how AI could respond with your any interactive movements, etc. So I think in a way it makes things easier, but in a way it makes things harder. Yeah. Maybe make the hands easier, make our brain harder. Yeah.
Havard.
Yeah, I mean, it for us very early we saw, like you said, there's an elite of people in this industry, especially in architecture, who embrace advanced technologies and advanced tools first, right? And we were very early contacted when we went kind of over the radar from the offices you've mentioned, like Sadid, Big, MBRDV, Foster's, Arab, you know, those firms that really embrace new technology. But our mission and vision has been to kind of build and make this technology available for the masses. And I think in kind of ultimate goal would be that you don't say that this project has been designed with the use of AI and that you really can't see it either, because that's really I think one of the things you were addressing is this architecture where AI becomes like, or parametric design becomes very visual in the project and very kind of the lead singer of the project. But I think the best examples where at least I feel that our technology has impact is when we see a project where you couldn't really tell if it was designed by humans or machine, but it's the performance of the project is amazing, right? Because the real problem is that urban planning and the way the process happens now makes, you know, with this rapid global urbanization, increasing regulations, we're building in new ways, and the need for building denser and faster has never been higher. So as humans, it's not bad intentions, right? It's just that it's so hard to come up with good solutions to these sites that are profitable, possible to build within the systems they want to build, right? And that has the intentions you want, the good urban spaces, this is a massive challenge, right? And we're to help those people solve that. You shouldn't chase for something completely new where you see that AI has been used to do so and so. It's those projects where we see that, wow, this project is really performing well. There's like, as an example, there is a project very recently there's been a lot of publicity around it, where the architects that had used this, there was a competition, an architectural competition, and they all got access to this Spacemaker tool, and some chose to use it, some didn't, right? The ones who chose to use it, they very quickly got to some ways of shaping the building, some ways of kind of organizing, doing the hard calculation stuff very easy. So they embraced it and they said, okay, let's move on from here. Let's start moving forward. And they were the winner concept of the competition, not only because they had the biggest ROI, because they also did, right? It was the most profitable project, but they had solved so much more, right? Because they had used the time they got and the insight they got and the data they got to make better creative decisions. So they had created some beautiful urban spaces. They had solved stormwater, which you normally never solve in a competition phase, right? And they had solved those difficult spaces, those transitions between the public space and the private space. So they had really managed to build a project and design the project where they had combined, you know, the insight that they got from the computer and the intuition they had themselves, but you could never tell. You couldn't look at it and say, okay, wow, this is designed by AI. It was just a beautiful project, right? Or a well-solved project. And that's, sorry, a well-solved project, because I think we talked about it earlier. I really believe that it's not about form following a function, which kind of parametric design has been about, but it's about kind of form following performance, which is something different. It's not about the form in itself. Sorry, Maria, go ahead.
No. I'm actually just adding to this. It's not so much about AI designing or doing the job that architects do. It's more about having a powerful tool in your hands that architects can actually use to design better, you know. And in all honesty, we have seen this throughout history. You know, when I started studying, you know, ArchiCAD came on the radar of everyone, basically. And apologies, there's some noise in the background. Archicad was on the radar, and we basically moved very quickly from designing by hand to designing with Archicad and digital tools. And I think with AI-driven tools, it's the same thing. It's just that the access to data is much better now, and also computational system and any kind of historian on the matter. And for example, someone like Stan and probably someone like Daniel can actually talk to that. Is AI has actually, like, the technology itself has been around for quite a while, and architects and urban planners would have made use of that much earlier. But the problem is that we had to get to the stage of cloud computing and really powerful servers in order to actually use it. And so it's just an opportunity for urban planners and architects to finally being able to use data sets that are out there, to create more sustainably. And I'm not saying they didn't do that before, but it's just, as was explained before, it's just being able to be much more data-driven in your decision-making is actually quite a powerful tool to have in your hands. And we do very much believe that architects are needed. They come with local knowledge that no computer will ever have. It's like going into expanding into a new market is it's hard because there is so much local knowledge that you need as an architect. Designing in Paris is different than designing in Berlin, than designing in Amsterdam, or even smaller cities. You need architects to understand that kind of environment and to understand the political system. Who are the stakeholders that you need to involve? What kind of information do they need to use? So it's about maybe the shift is not so much in what we design, but it's more, well, there is going to be a shift. Hopefully it's better, but the shift is also in terms of the profession. What is it that we can actually focus on? And we very much believe that AI is not going to replace architects, but those architects that are using AI will replace those that don't.
I think this is a great point to pick up on, and
yeah, totally.
I think this is so. Architects who use AI will replace those who don't. It reminds me of a comment that was made about Foreign Office architects. Alejandro Zaraporo and Fashid Musavi, about 20 years ago, where people in the office, if they couldn't use computation, they weren't even employable at that point. But there's an interesting kind of question in my mind, because I don't know if any of you have seen the Mike Haley's video, The Vision of the Future, where you're talking to your computer and your computer produces, it actually is about a design of a chair, but it could be a building. And he says, Autodesk, show me some chairs. And my critique of that actually is, with time, the AI is going to know your preferences, just as it knows, Spotify knows what you like in terms of music. So it's not going to say, here are some chairs. It's going to say, here's some chairs you will probably like. Now, the question ultimately is going to be, as AI gets more and more powerful, what is that going to lead to? And on Wanyu's chart at the beginning, we saw this kind of graph whereby the computer was taking over more and more, to the point that there was more time for the architect to do other things. But doesn't that will not lead inexorably to a situation whereby AI might eventually, once it becomes super powerful, be able to take over the role of the architect? And I throw that out there, Havard, because I'm always intrigued by Carl's comment of the self-driving car. In the sense that, actually, if you look at the self-driving car, what that's done is actually made the driver redundant, in the same way that the car made the horse redundant years ago. And actually, if it is going to be a self-driving car, if that's the model, then architects are going to be made redundant. And I think it's kind of interesting, because Wolf Prix has a different model. He actually also used the model of the car. And he says, well, the architect should be in the front seats and AI should be in the back seats. But I want to just float this idea of, or this question about whether there is a danger that AI is going to lead to the death of the architect. We've already seen, I think, there's some studies that say, no, it doesn't have this creativity and so on. But these studies have been academic studies without realizing that actually what's happening in the office is that people already are using these tools to do things that, instead of having 20 people in office, it might well be that in a few years' time we have 2 people with Xkool technology and that's it. So I'm just wondering whether you see a risk in the end of it leading inexorably towards the death of the architect.
Yeah.
I really like the. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, Wanyu. No, go ahead, please.
Okay. I mean, I really like Neil's metaphor of this horse and car. I also want to reply on that. I think the horse today still exists, right? And the car is gonna be replaced by automatic driving car. But horse gonna exist for maybe even longer time, and the horse become more and more expensive for those sports, for those performances. Yeah, they have a different way of using it now, and maybe in the future, maybe near future. I mean, this oil cars, let's say gas cars, they're gonna be more and more expensive because they are very limited. And same as architects, when the AI architects takes over, like I don't know, 70%, and the human architects become more precious, and they do a lot of creative work. And some people will like more, I don't know, more general productive design as by AI, and some more customized design by the humans, because they want to talk with the architects, they want to communicate, they want the architects to understand their life, to understand their demands. So they want to hire human architects. So I think human architects still has their value, and they become more and more valuable because those ones are real architects. They will really stand for the grounds for architects. And maybe also architects at that moment will be very expensive. I mean, for the design fee will be much higher than today. Maybe it's also a good thing, because I always believe that AI do the massive production helpers. But for the spotlights, like the iconic buildings, these more creative buildings are done by human, by the real architects. So our city is combining this kind of two things together. We cannot have every building be so iconic, be so creative. Most of the buildings are the milieu, the background of the city. Only few are the spotlights. I think there should be more distinguishable division. Like we have a Chanel, Gucci, Prada, those like the luxury brands, and we have Zara, H&M, etc. Yeah, this is what I think.
Havard?
Yes, no, like Maria said, and we've talked about it many times, I think, during this talk, that we definitely don't think, we think AI will, like AI is a powerful tool that enables a lot, but it most of all, it empowers the humans, that puts them in position of doing things in a different way. And I think historically, we've always feared like radical new things coming in and changing how we do things. And I think the history has also shown us that the importance and how adaptable we are as humans. So that once there comes like this really big shift, we adapt to it, and we find kind of other ways of doing, or we're basically replacing things we did with other things, right? To put it simple. And I think that's, if you look at the industry and the problem we're talking about here, this industry has had a falling productivity since the 1950s. It's the least digitized industry of the world. And I think all architects who studied architecture and then went into the industry realized that the jobs they do is nothing like what they did at school, and nothing like what they signed up to study architecture for, even further away from that, right? So it just proves that we have a long way to go into doing what humans really want to do and what they should do and what they are needed for. And I think that will be more aligned in the future, because right now, I know so many, I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I've been sitting late doing stupid calculations or building stuff that I felt like I wasn't using my brain in the right way. Like I was just producing like stupid things, and I wanted to test 100 ways of developing a site, and I only had capacity to test 2 because of the lack of tools and the processes, and I didn't have the information, etc. So this will definitely help us, but we're not even close to seeing anything that would replace the architect, right? It's just a much needed leap towards a better way of doing things, right?
I'm wondering, because when I was a student, I can recall, for example, when I'd go on a vacation somewhere, and I would, first of all, I'd go to a travel agent, and I would sit down and talk to the travel agent, and they would fix something, and then I would go to a camera shop, and I would buy some films for my camera, and then when I came back from my vacation, I would go and take my films to be processed. And then I'd wait 2 weeks and I'd get my films back and so on. And in a way, I'd never imagined that would change. But, you know, we don't really have many travel agents these days. We book our flights online. We don't process films that we use digital. They're all automatically produced digitally. In fact, actually, camera shops have gone out of business because most mobile phones have cameras in them. So I don't know whether we can be so guaranteed the potential future of the profession of architecture. And I just know it could well. I think Wanyu's idea of this slightly sentimental sort of view that we look back and maybe there will be some special projects for architects, but they'll be more expensive. And I think somehow, for example, again, when I was a student, you'd have these things called telegrams. People would get married and they would send a telegram, and it would be, a quaint old-fashioned technique. And now a handwritten letter is kind of like that. It's a kind of charming old blast from the past, And I'm wondering whether, all of this actually was going to lead to a bit where we have a sort of nostalgic sort of thing. Just to go back to the metaphor of the car, at one point a car was called a horseless carriage. Then cars became kind of popular, more popular than a horse and cart, and a carriage was no longer called a carriage, but was called a horse-drawn carriage, and then we had cars. So actually, I'm just sort of wondering whether, in the end, with the self-driving car, we're going to have these kind of human-driven cars. It will be kind of romantic things that maybe if you get married, you will go and be driven in it and things. And I just wonder. I mean, I'm not so sure that we can guarantee that the architect in the future is going to be what we were brought up with, and maybe it's not such a bad thing. One of the interesting kind of points made in one of the books that I've been reading was about self-driving cars. Is they were saying, well, eventually it'll be too expensive for insurance-wise to have humans driving because they're less reliable, and human driving will fade out, and maybe we won't even notice. I never noticed the end of travel agents and camera shops. I'm just wondering whether soon we won't even notice. The architect will be phased out and something else will be there. I don't know if that's a provocative way to end.
Yeah, it's also, I'm probably in the same provocative, in a way, mind right now. Like, if we are going back to that kind of, is AI going to make things easier, or we are going to have super users? For me, it's like depending on the process that AI is applied and the period that we are talking about. If you are talking long-term, personally, I think we have AI that makes things easier. Short-term probably is going to be the super user because, again, we are still engaging, even if we have AIs that are helping us design-wise, we still have a lot of other processes that are pretty much hands-on, a lot of data and stuff that you have to process, client relations and so on, but then when it comes to this idea of, is the architect going to go away? I know that we don't want to give up on that. As architects, we want to be still in control. And I think it's important for us to make the distinction when we talk about tools and history. The thing is, the tools that we had in history, they are not AI. They were not tools that were able to learn by themselves. And that's a huge distinction, because we cannot anymore follow the history in a way lesson, because the history, you're using a pen. A pen is nothing but a tool, but you cannot compare a tool with an AI. A pen with an AI, you cannot compare it, because an AI is going to learn by itself, And this is a software that also creates software in the end. There are already like softwares that are created by AI. So, And then it's also another point that I want to make is also we have this kind of idea that still architect has to interact with a client. If you are thinking, it was the same discussion when they had this kind of counselors, AI counselors. So it was only a bot, and you'll just have a counseling in a way session with a bot. And initially, the idea was that that's not going to work because humans, they need in a way other humans to in a way confess or open up or something, to discuss their problems. And actually, the researchers, what they found out that actually people are more open when they are talking with an AI bot than they are open when they talk with a human counselor. Yeah. And right now, also here in the US, there are a lot of not experiments, I think there are bots that are used for PTSD treatment. Yeah. And many of those humans, they are more open to talk with those bots because of all the crazy things that happen to them. Yeah. And for them, it will be very hard to open to a human, for example. And then it's much easier to open to a AI bot. So I think also when it comes to, we have to understand if we talk short term, then probably no, we still have a sort of we still have a sort of architect driving the processes and interacting and so on. But long term, like talking about 40, 50 years from now, I would say probably AI is going to take over a lot of things, and probably what we define today as an architect is going to be something else, yeah, but not the architect that we think of today. Yeah. I understand that there are a lot of aspects that still need to be worked on, because, for example, as humans, you have so many, your perception in a way, it's influenced by so many stimuli in a way. So also your body chemistry, and then environment, and then experience, and then history and stuff, yeah. And at one point, I think we are going to get to that phase where AI actually is going to have all those senses, yeah. And yeah, game over.
I think it was Jack Ma. Yeah, I think it was Jack Ma who made two very good statements on AI generally. One, he said, well, because I do believe that it's going to be very gradual. We are not just going to, replace architects with AI. But I think he said that, well, because we are going to be more efficient with the help of AI, and we're going to be faster in certain aspects, maybe we are going to reduce our work week from 5 to 4 days and our work day from 8 hours to 4 hours. Quite frankly, who wouldn't welcome that? And then the other thing that he said is that I think the leg up that we have currently, at least as humans, over AI and will have for a while, is our sense for creativity. And architecture is a creative profession after all. It's just like music, just like literature, or even filmmaking, which is where architects or humans can actually shine. So I'm personally not really afraid of that happening anytime soon, and agree with Daniel. If it happens, it will be very gradual, and by the time it happens, it will already be a natural way of doing things anyways.
Yeah. Is the boiling frog analogy?
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't agree more. I think architects is one thing, but you could say that technology is made by humans for humans, and I think planning our physical surroundings is something that a lot of people today are involved in. And I think the complexity of planning our physical surroundings will only increase, and it will not. It's a need that will not disappear, right? We will still need to plan our physical surroundings and build them and design them and kind of rethink how we do it as the premises change. And I think the humans into that, I think it will actually just be more people who work with planning our physical surroundings in the future than today. Even though I do believe that AI will replace a lot of the tasks that we're doing today, I still think that the problem we're addressing of planning our physical surroundings will still be a growing problem.
Maybe, we're talking about the future, but let me just round it off with one question, because one of the things that intrigued me, you both set up your practice in 2016.
I just have a hard stop, so I just need to say that I very soon need to jump off.
Okay. You both set up your practice in 2016. who was first?
I don't know.
It's not
Does it
important.
matter? Does it matter?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So one thing I just want to sort of round things up and say, I was expecting that your practices are so different that actually bringing you guys together, or so similar. Sorry, so similar. Bringing you guys together, I would have seen differences. I remember once at the AA, Peter Eisenman was brought to have a conversation with Rem Koolhaas, and Brett Steele introduced them and said, these guys are very similar. They're both theorists. Even some of their buildings look very similar. And actually what we discovered the differences. What I'm surprised with today is actually how you guys at different ends of the world have ended up doing kind of very similar things with a very similar approach. So for me, it's been incredibly interesting. I hope that we can continue this conversation having established this link, because it seems like there are two very dynamic companies in different ends of the world thinking very similar things, and I'm convinced that this is the future of architecture. So I would like to thank you all for being part of this. Thank you also, Daniel, for being part of this. It's been an incredibly interesting and provocative discussion, and let's have more in the future. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
everyone. Thank you.